Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is my co-host, Billy Brandt. On this week's episode, we'll talk a few headlines in the world of mixed martial arts. We'll give a quick preview of the Ultimate Fighter 21 finale, and we will pick the complete main card for UFC 189 this weekend on pay-per-view from Las Vegas, Nevada. Once again, as I mentioned, I'm your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is the man known as Billy Brandt, Big Shot Bill. And how's it going today, Billy?
Pretty good. Got a lot of fights coming up this week.
Boy, yeah, just a lot of fights. We have UFC 189 this weekend, Ultimate Fighter finale also this weekend. Then we have Invicta coming up this weekend as well. That's going to be on Friday night. Then we turn around next week. We have UFC Fight Night San Diego on Wednesday. Then there's a Bellator fight on Friday. And then UFC Glasgow on Saturday. A lot of fights here in these 2 weeks.
It's going to be tough keeping up with all this.
All right, let's start with the big headline that came out this week. Gilbert Melendez, former Strikeforce lightweight champion and one-time UFC title contender, has been slapped with a 1-year suspension after failing a post-fight drug test after last month's fight at UFC 188. Melendez, now 33 years old, tested positive for exogenous origin of testosterone metabolites, according to a release issued by the UFC on Monday. Of course, that fight at UFC 188 was a narrow split decision loss to Eddie Alvarez on June 13th rather, and the UFC conducted its own drug testing for this event because, of course, it was in Mexico, which does not have its local athletic commission. The year-long suspension will be retroactive to the date of the bout, so I guess that saves him about a month. He was scheduled to fight coming up this Wednesday, speaking of the fight night there in San Diego, is he was going to face up-and-comer Al Iaquinta. That fight has now been officially scratched, and Iaquinta will not have a replacement for the event, which is unfortunate because he was originally supposed to take on Bobby Green. He got hurt. Melendez filled in. It's still going to be a big-time fight. Obviously now with Melendez out, Iaquinta is out of this event, and kind of unfortunate. I was looking forward to seeing the Raging Al again, but looking over a quick quote here from Gilbert Melendez: "I did not inject anything, but I am responsible and accept the consequences for the results. I will make sure I am better educated about the products I use and their implications. Going forward, I will ensure no products I use will contain banned substances." Official report, I got this from sheerdog.com. It looks as though he took something that he thought was safe. It wasn't. It didn't seem like it was that intentional. Gilbert Melendez isn't the guy that has had a history of taking performance-enhancing drugs. He's not a guy you would really say is completely jacked at 155 pounds. Not saying he's weak, but not a guy that you look at and go, "Oh, that dude's ripped. He has a six-pack and all this stuff." So it's a little surprising, but at least he's owning up to it, which, again, I think in this day and age you kind of almost have to do, because the denial train, I think people are wearing thin. These testing are getting too good to catch someone that didn't do it.
Yeah, man. I was pretty sad when I heard this one. I was so excited for that fight coming up with Al Iaquinta. And not only that, but Gilbert just didn't seem like one of those dudes you'd ever expect. Like, when I heard that, I had to repeat it like 3 times. Like, Gilbert? I didn't expect it, man. He's an exciting fighter. Hopefully we see him again and he gets it all figured out.
And I guess this goes to show that the UFC's testing policies, when they move into a country like Mexico that doesn't have an athletic commission, was able to catch something like this, that it was. So I think that's good for the UFC moving forward. Obviously, they're going to do more fights in more countries that don't have commissions, and the testing is going to fall on them to do it. So I guess that's good. I guess you could say their policy and testing is working. And one thing I did want to bring up: are we sure it's Gilbert Melendez? Are we sure it's not his twin brother Gilbert Melendez?
Yeah,
I wonder if they double check that, because it could have been Gilbert this whole time.
that's actually a good point, Jim. I don't know if they looked into that, and they should, so we can get the Al Iaquinta fight. Someone check Gilbert.
You know who didn't check into it? Reebok.
Yeah.
Reebok did not check into that. And they also didn't check into how flexible their schedule could be as well. They did not check into that either.
Oh, man.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, we kind of mentioned it last week. Reebok released the jerseys for the UFC fighters. They accidentally spelled Gilbert Melendez's name wrong, switching the L and the B to Giblert. And then when they did their huge Hunger Games presentation there of the uniforms, behind them it said flexibility, but in the ability part, it was missing an I. So obviously Reebok not great on spell check.
Get it together, Reebok.
All right, and speaking of Reebok, I had a great interview with Luis Smolka this past week. It was on the audio version last week, but if you missed it, you can listen to that or go right here on your YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Got a chance to talk with Luis Smolka. He's fighting this weekend at UFC 189. He's going to be on the Fight Pass portion of the undercards, taking on Neil Seery in the flyweight division. He kind of gave his thoughts on being, one of the first guys to wear Reebok in the octagon. Obviously his upcoming fight, what he's been doing since his legendary Sweet Chin Music knockout of Richie Vasiluk back in Sydney, Australia last year. So it was great catching up with Luis and really looking forward to his fight coming up this weekend. Also, speaking of interviews, next Wednesday, and I'll probably plug it again as well, I got to sit down with Kevin Lee, the Motown Phenom. He will be fighting on the main card against James Mutasari coming up UFC Fight Night San Diego. Really looking forward to his fight. He's definitely one of the up-and-coming guys here in this division. And also, Billy and I, later this week, it should be available for the audio version on this week's show. This week, we're going to sit down with Johnny Case coming up 3-0 now in the lightweight division, coming off a big win there at UFC 188 against Francisco Trevino. So we're going to talk to him about that as well. So that's what we got going on in the interview run, up-and-coming for the show. Before we get to, we got two cards to break down this week. I want to mention Invicta will be having an event on UFC Fight Pass Friday night as part of International Fight Week in Las Vegas. A couple big time fights as Christine Cyborg Santos will defend her featherweight title for Invicta against Faith Van Duyn. And then we will also have the atomweight first defense for Hirka Turbiso as she takes on Ayaka Hamasaki. And also very big fight. You might not think a 1-on-1 fighter would have a notable appearance here for Invicta, but Marina Shafir, she is one of the women for the four horsewomen there with Ronda Rousey over there in Glendale, California. She will be making her Invicta debut against the person making their professional debut in Amber Leibrock. So that's kind of one of the bigger fights there. Also, Tanya Everger, longtime veteran of the sport, is going to take on Irene Alda. So just 7 fights for this Invicta card, Billy. I thought they would go a little more, but just kind of looking over, do you think this is a solid event here for Invicta 13?
Yeah, I think it's a decent card. I mean, especially the time and placement, International Fight Week. There's all this hype going around about just MMA in general right now with the Fight Pass. People will be on there a lot this week, so it's good timing at least. I think a lot of people will watch them. Events are exciting. A lot of people sleep on them.
Like I said, I wish they had more than 7 fights. I feel like that's kind of lacking. I mean, Invicta has signed a lot of people in recent months, and I think they got a lot of talent. There's some girls I've been heard signed to Invicta contracts 6-7 months ago, and I still haven't seen them fight in the organization yet. So there's some girls that have kind of been hyped up when they've signed, and now we're only bringing 7 fights. And then for their atomweight title, once again, they're bringing in someone who hasn't even fought in the organization before, and they get a title shot. I think there's a couple things I'd like to see Invicta kind of to fix that. I mean, it's not always the case. You can't always have, someone maybe ready to go and you pull someone overseas, but this is now the second or third time in a row they basically bring like an unknown to fight for the atomweight title against the champion.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. They need to get someone they built up through the promotion.
All right, so that is Invicta FC 13. As I mentioned, will be July 9th in Las Vegas. So that should be pretty interesting. So if you have the Fight Pass, tune into that one. All right, now since the Ultimate Fighter 21 finale takes place Sunday, and the fact that they haven't released the main card bout list yet, because the final episode of Ultimate Fighter 21 will be this Wednesday, tonight, we're going to go over a couple of the main fights. We will make picks on them, but our official picks will come on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, Thursday. to fill in any gaps in the main card that we may have missed, because it looks as though there may be one, if not two, cast members fighting here on this card, and they may get added to the main card. But I'm pretty sure on these three will be shown on the main card. At least the main event will, and I think the co-main event. But the three fights I want to talk about, we'll start first in the women's strawweight division, as Michelle Waterson, former Invicta atomweight champion, will make her UFC debut against Angela Magana. And very excited about this fight. A lot of people obviously very excited for the karate hottie Michelle Waterson to finally make her way into the UFC. The big question mark, obviously, for Waterson is how she will adapt moving up 10 pounds. It's not the fact that she cut a lot of weight to 105 or anything like that, but obviously the opportunity to fight in the UFC is, amazing, and obviously a little pay increase as well. So for Waterson, losing her title, as much as that hurt, and I think as much as she probably would like to have that fight back, she saw that would be the best chance for her to move up, without having the title and kind of leaving Invicta high and dry, so to speak. So she moves on to the UFC, and they give her Angela Magana, who's kind of the bad girl of the division, her and Beck Rollins, so to speak. And honestly, Magana, I think, has some decent stand-up, but honestly, through her time in the show and obviously her fight on the finale against Tisha Torres, I don't really see a whole lot there, to be quite honest. I don't think she's really great in that one area. Like I said, her stand-up's all right. She didn't really look like she had that much of a ground game. And I think Waterson, despite maybe having a little bit of a size disadvantage, she's one of the more skilled females in the sport. And I just think her overall skill, regardless of the, any sort of size disadvantage, will weigh out in this one, wherever the fight goes.
Yeah, I don't want to be too negative on Magana, but I've never seen nothing from her. She's really impressed. When I get excited about this fight, it's more just the first Michelle Waterson fight we get to see in the UFC. And for her, I think it's a good decision. If I was MMA, I'd always want to be in the UFC, the top organization. I think this is a good fight for her to warm up to. Not saying like they throw Magana because it's easy, but I mean, if she's going to move up 10 pounds, it's a good fight not to get thrown just in the sharks real quick. She gets a warm-up fight and a feel-out.
The co-main event of the evening, Jorge Masvidal against Cesar Ferreira. And no, I did not missay that. Cesar Ferreira is moving down to 170, which I didn't think was possible. I thought that dude was a pretty big middleweight. Not only that, you have Jorge Masvidal moving up 15 pounds to 170. Very interesting. I don't really know. I kind of get Ferreira's reasoning. I don't get Masvidal's. I'm not really sure of the reason. I don't know if this is a one-off thing or maybe that new IV restrictions that we were talking about on last week's show hindered. I'm not really sure what's going on, but Masvidal is going to be at a serious size disadvantage in this fight. That's going to be apparent. Now, the question mark is how much will that weight cut take out of Ferreira? Because obviously, with Masvidal moving up, he's probably cutting very little weight to make 170, if any. And Ferreira, as we know, is probably going to cut at least 20 pounds to try to make it down to 170. So that's a very interesting thing. I look for, if this thing goes past 5 minutes to see how Ferreira's conditioning is. And overall, technically, I would probably say Masvidal's, probably the more skilled striker. Will obviously have better conditioning, but how will he deal with that size of Ferreira? That's going to be very interesting because obviously I thought he had pretty good power at 185. I got to imagine he's going to have a lot of knockout power now in the welterweight division.
Yeah, this fight throws me off a lot. There's so many questions here as far as him moving up and Ferreira moving down, Ferreira. But the thing is, Masvidal is so tough, man. Like, I think I've seen he gets rocked in like every fight, and somehow this dude just keeps coming at you and keep finding a way. I think it'll sort of play out similar. It'll look like Chuck Gordon's last fight, where Ferreira's going to look like a different weight class. But if Masvidal can keep his distance, maybe if he puts him on his back, I don't know, that'd be tough. He could find a way, but this is a tough one. There's so many questions.
Yeah, Masvidal's only been knocked out once in his career. That was actually to Rodrigo Dam back in Senegoku in 2008.
Yeah, I mean,
he has fought almost 40 times professionally. So yeah, he's a tough dude to finish.
every time you see him, like the Crookshank fight, he went completely stiff, and by the time he touched the ground, he was popping back up to his feet. Like he'll keep coming forward, man. He's a tough dude.
Definitely interesting, but I'm gonna probably go with Fajeda. I just think that the size is going to be too much. I think Masvidal will definitely have a fair chance, but I think that size is going to be very tough for him to deal with.
That's what I thought first go, but then I thought, you know what? Maybe if the weight cut affects him, Masvidal survives a little bit and gets later in the fight, he can find a way.
I think, yeah, if it can get into the second round, I would definitely favor Masvidal. But that opening 5 minutes is going to be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
The main event of the evening, Jake Ellenberger against Stephen Thompson at 170 pounds. Really, this one's pretty simple. Can Stephen Thompson keep this thing standing? Because if he can, there's no doubt he's the better striker than Jake Ellenberger, and obviously he's the more rangier guy. For as much power as Ellenberger has, he's not a real tall guy. He's around 5'8", 5'9". We got Stephen Thompson here checking in at 6 foot. So that's going to be hard for him to try to get inside. And the last time he fought someone that had a really good reach, Rory McDonald, Jake Ellenberger did not fare very well. Now, obviously, he couldn't get the takedown in that fight, so that's the difference. If he gets the takedown, Thompson's going to be active off his back, but he's not a really big submission guy, and he's not going to get really threatened that way. So that'll be, if he can get the takedown, he can win, but if he can't, Thompson definitely the more electrifying striker.
Yeah, man, this dude Thompson's so fun to watch on the stand-up. Like the way his style, it's so exciting. Ellenberger, I'm not going to count him 100% on the feet. He has a strong power shot. He could land a knockout for sure, but it is that simple. Ellenberger's going to go look for that takedown. If he can't get it, he's probably in trouble.
All right, now if I had to pick, I really like Stephen Thompson. I'm a big fan of his, but Ellenberger has fought a little better competition. He's has a little more experience. Has fought in the main event, a fight night several times here. And obviously, Thompson's coming off an injury. It's been a while since we've seen Stephen Thompson. He was supposed to fight back in February, got hurt. That was 5 months ago. And so I don't think it's been quite a year, but it's been about 10 months, I think, since Stephen Thompson's fight.
It's been a while.
Let me double check on that because I like to try to be exact here. Let's see. Thompson's last fight was, September 27th at UFC 178.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been about 10 months. So I'm going to go with Ellenberger just because Thompson hasn't fought too many wrestlers in his career. Last time he really got taken down and tested in that category was his second fight in the UFC against Matt Brown, who was pretty successful with the takedown. So I'll go with Jake Ellenberger.
I'm actually going to pick Wonder Boy here, man. I think he's exciting. Ellenberger's been sort of up and down, and I think this is a fight that breaks through for him, and he starts showing his full potential. He can be a star.
All right, as I mentioned, because of the final fight for the Ultimate Fighter American Top Team against Blackzilians airing tonight, the official main card for this fight on Sunday, July 12th on Fox Sports 1 has not been released yet. So we're just kind of picking those 3 fights there. We'll fill in the gaps on our Facebook page with the official picks tomorrow afternoon, along with the audio version of the show, just to update people listening out there. So let's roll along here and let's get to a quicker show this week because we don't have 8 fights to break down. So let's get to UFC 189, Las Vegas, Nevada, July 11th on a pay-per-view, the cornerstone here of International Fight Week for the UFC in Las Vegas. And real quickly, just before we get to this event, it's kind of foreshadowing the main event of Conor McGregor against Chad Mendes. For those of you who don't know, or maybe you saw it or just happened to miss it, Conor McGregor was on Conan O'Brien this past week, the interview show there on TBS. Got a chance to check that out. I thought it was a good interview. I thought, Conan made some jokes, but I actually asked him some great fight questions, and I think actually did his research instead of just kind of making jokes if you watched his earlier guest. and he actually seems legitimately interested in this fight, and obviously interested in the guy in Conor McGregor, who is Conan O'Brien is obviously of Irish descent, so I think that kind of maybe factored in as well. But Billy, I didn't know if you had a chance to see an interview or any excerpts and what you thought about Conor on Conan O'Brien.
Yeah, I did watch it. He did good. I didn't expect it. Every time I doubt the dude, he pulls through. He made some jokes that I was laughing pretty hard that I didn't expect. I watched the embedded. Mendez was watching, and he was laughing. So Connor did pretty well on that, and he never falls through, man. You put him in front of a camera, he does what he has to do.
Couple things I noticed. There seemed to be a lot of fight fans there in Conan's audience. They were really with Conor, and when they played that little clip there of Chad Mendez kind of talking some stuff towards Conor, you see the fans boo, and they were kind of booing Ronaldo and stuff. So they seemed interested. So that was cool. And I also liked when they were talking about Conor's gorilla tattoo. When Conan asked him about it, I don't know how many people have actually asked him that. And he's like, "Yeah, so what about your tattoo?" And he was just like, "I don't know. He just thought it looked cool." Like, and I thought that was pretty interesting. Him going over the tattoo there of the gorilla.
Yeah, at least he's honest there.
And also, one thing I didn't know, he was talking about the studying of different predator animals to help his movement. Now, that's something I didn't know he did. I don't know if anyone else is doing, and I find that very intriguing. That's a very interesting way of looking at planning your footwork and movement.
Yeah, I'm not sure how serious that is or how much he actually goes into that, but that's like the most interesting thing I've ever heard a fighter do. It's awesome. I mean, I've never heard of anything like that, and it's super interesting. I want to look at his footwork now more closely.
All right, with that said, let's get to the first fight of the evening, bantamweight division, Thomas Almeida against Brad Pickett. Thomas Almeida, the up-and-coming guy here in the bantamweight division, 18-0, undefeated in his career, 2-0 so far in the UFC. His last fight, he dispatched Yves Joboy in the first round, UFC 186, and 14 of his 18 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Brad Pickett, 4-5 in the UFC. He's moving back up to bantamweight, where he's seen most of the success in his career. His last fight at flyweight, he lost to Chico Camus at Fight Night 57, and 10 of his 24 career victories are by submission. This is a very interesting fight. This is probably the best guy Thomas Almeida has fought in his entire career. Brad Pickett moving back up to 135 rather. Should have better conditioning. We should see a more loose and more relaxed Brad Pickett, and I think moving up to 135 is a better move for him. He just didn't seem right at 125. I don't know if it was the weight cut or how he was handling. He just never really seemed to get on a good flow at 125. It just didn't really fit him well. And at 135, I think he'll be more comfortable. He has good stand-up. We know that there. But to me, the X factor is Almeida, I believe, is a pretty accomplished black belt. But Pickett is a guy that doesn't have a black belt, but pretty good grappler. If you look at a lot of fights, he's very tricky on his takedowns. He's very good at top control, and he's very smart with his submission offense and defense. So I got to believe that's kind of the X factor, is Pickett maybe kind of shooting in for the takedown. We really haven't seen that much from Almeida. He's been content to really stand up and play on his feet, which so far has been fantastic. I mean, he tore Tim Gorman apart, and then he obviously, as I said, knocked out Yves Joboy in the first round. So this kid is no joke on the feet. And if he can get by a guy like Brad Pickett, he's, with this bantamweight division kind of being shallow, he's maybe only then 1 or 2 fights away from getting a title shot. This would definitely prove if he is legit.
Yeah, I mean, this is that division where everyone is pretty close. All those names are in the hat, but this is going to be a tough one for Almeida. He has looked really good. I think Pickett will be able to get him down, and he's strong on top. So I don't know if he'll be able to scramble, get to his feet good, or put some submission threat. He has to do something along those lines, because I think Pickett will be able to get him down and control the fight.
The next fight of the evening is in the welterweight division, as Gunnar Nelson will take on Brandon Thatch. Looking at Nelson, 4-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Rick Story at Fight Night 53, and 9 of his 13 career victories are by submission. Looking at Thatch, 2-1 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Ben Henderson at Fight Night 60, and 8 of his 11 career victories are by knockout. Very interesting fight. A very interesting fight. 2 of the younger guys in the welterweight division, both coming off a loss, looking to get a win to kind of reinsert themselves into the top 15 of the division. And standing up, I would say in terms of skill set, they're even, but Thatch obviously presents a lot more power, and he's a little bigger dude at 170. Grappling, obviously, Gunnar Nelson, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, very accomplished on the ground. He's a guy that I don't know if too many people in the welterweight division want to mess with on the ground, and that also presents a very intriguing element to the game there. And for Brandon Thatch, a lot of people kind of questioned his conditioning coming into the Ben Henderson fight. You know, he had never been past, I think, like the second round, a fight scheduled for 5, you know, long layoff, taking on the best guy he's ever fought in Ben Henderson. And even though he lost that fight, going into the 4th round, I still thought he looked strong. He was still throwing heavy bombs. So I think that question of can he, you know, go 15 minutes, that was answered. This guy could be ready to go for 15 minutes. And to me, I don't really see Nelson going for the takedown. He's not a traditional takedown guy, maybe in a scramble or something, but Thatch proved even in Ben Henderson fight that he's a tough dude to take down. 1, because of his skill set, and 2, just because of his size. He's a very big guy from 170, very tough to take down. And standing up, even though Nelson's going to be a little shorter, not as long range as Thatch, his obviously movement, that karate style, is very hard to prepare for. There are very few guys that move like Gunnar Nelson. So it'll be interesting to see how Thatch approaches that, whether he kind of sits and waits with Nelson kind of playing more slow game, or if he just goes full ruckus mode, as I like to call it, and just comes out firing and see how Nelson reacts. So very intriguing. Both guys have the ability to finish, but this is one when it was announced, you know, with the opponents changing around that I may even be more, well, now that the main event's different, but I may be most excited about this fight here. I'm very intrigued by this one.
Yeah, I can't say I'm not most excited for McGregor. I'm gonna show my fandom a little bit how much of a fan I am, but this fight is super interesting because honestly, I'm sort of I might be the only one that thinks this, but I think standing up, I think Thatch would be able to destroy him. I think that his stand-up's really good. He's super creative with his shots. He's strong. Nelson has to, I think, catch him in like a scramble and take him down. I mean, like you said, he doesn't shoot traditional takedowns, but somewhere in that scramble, and if he can get to the grappling, that's where he's going to win. It's honestly, it's almost similar to the Wonder Boy Ellenberger fight, except for Gunner's not like a strong wrestler like that, where he's going to shoot them takedowns. But I think if it stays on the feet, Thatch will be able to handle it pretty easy.
Well, this is one fight where I think if Nelson falters, even if it's not like a dominating performance by Thatch, there's been talk of him dropping down to 155, that he doesn't really cut much weight to get 170. And if he loses another fight in a row, even if it's close, I kind of wonder if that starts creeping up in his head more, dropping down.
I don't know how much he walks around at or what he cuts right now, but I think it's definitely good. He walks around with a little like extra on him, so he probably could. And yeah, we'll see in this fight, though. We'll see how this fight goes.
The next fight of the evening is in the featherweight division as Jeremy Stephens takes on Dennis Bermudez. Jeremy Stephens is 10-10 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Charles Oliveira at the Ultimate Fighter 20 finale, and 15 of his 23 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Dennis Bermudez, 7-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Ricardo Lamas at UFC 180, and 7 of his 14 career victories are by decision. Now, even though Bermudez has a lot of decision victories, there's one thing that he is not, and that is boring. I don't think this dude's had a boring fight in the UFC. He's nonstop action, great pace, whether it's stand-up or being on top after a takedown. And even though he kind of got caught there in that guillotine from Lamas, I'm not going to say it was a fluke because Ricardo Lamas is a top 5 featherweight, but definitely disappointing for Bermudez. And I think for Jeremy Stephens, even though he's not that old, he's been around a long time. Like I said, 10-10 in the UFC. He's had over 30 professional fights. I think some of these fights, Billy, are starting to kind of wear on him a little bit. His last 2 fights, he has not looked really good. In the Oliveira fight, yeah, it was a close fight. Oliveira didn't have that great a performance, but Oliveira's threat of the takedown, kind of controlling, and Jeremy Stephens kind of for once in his career, kind of being afraid to pull the trigger, standing up. I thought that was one of Jeremy Stephens' worst perform. Really, it was just a bad fight overall. But Jeremy Stephens didn't do himself a lot of favors in this fight. And if he does that against Dennis Bermudez, he's not just going to lose, but I think he's going to get finished. I think that's the difference. Oliveira is not really a knockout guy. He's great with submissions, but Dennis Bermudez is a guy that if he gets on top of you or you're going to be kind of lethargic, he's just going to be all over you. So if Jeremy Stephens can adjust that, look more like the Jeremy Stephens, albeit a loss, that fought Cub Swanson, he's going to be a lot better conditioned to win this fight. But if he shows up like he did against Charles Oliveira, Dennis Bermudez is going to wipe the floor with him.
Yeah, I'm pretty worried about him in this fight. Bermudez is so tough, and I don't want to call it too quick because the fight hasn't happened, but if he ends up showing up like he did those last couple fights, he might get finished pretty bad, and this might be one of the last times we see him. But then again, I could be wrong. He could come out, look great, and put on a show. But if he does get finished, I mean, he's had a lot of fights and a lot of wars.
If it stays standing, that's his best chance, and I think he can do that. I mean, he's shut down quite a few wrestlers here since dropping down to 145, so I don't find it hard to believe that he can stop Bermudez on the takedown. If it stays standing, that's his best chance because of his knockout power, really skilled there. And I think Bermudez has grown as a stand-up fighter. I think he has a lot better stand-up than when he debuted on The Ultimate Fighter several years ago. But I would still say Jeremy Stephens is better that category. It makes it a little more maybe like 60-40 than, instead of maybe you could say like if he was on the bottom where he doesn't really have many submissions, where in that case it'd be like 80-20 Bermudez. So he obviously much better chances that kind of evens things up. And like I said, if he shows up, more willing to throw more output, then yeah, he definitely has a chance.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not 100% counting him out, but if he shows up like he has, he's going to be in some trouble, and I don't really know what he's got left after that, but we'll see how this fight goes.
The co-main event of the evening is for the UFC Welterweight Championship, as Robbie Lawler will put his title on the line for the first time against Rory MacDonald. Luque McDonald, 9-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a win over Tarek Saffiedine at Fight Night 54, and 7 of his 18 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Robbie Lawler, 10-4 in the UFC. His last fight was to capture the welterweight title, beating Johnny Hendricks at UFC 188, and 19 of his 25 career victories are by knockout. Looking at this fight is obviously a rematch. These two fought a little over a year ago, with Robbie Lawler coming out victorious. That was back at UFC 167, actually now going on 2 years in November. UFC 167, Robbie Lawler was able to win by split decision. That was a fight where I think at the time, Robbie Lawler, that was only his third fight back at 170. Maybe his conditioning wasn't quite to where it is now. I think definitely Robbie Lawler won that fight, despite it being a split decision. I think most people had Lawler winning that fight. And I think the main reason for it, one, was the power of Lawler. I think Roy had trouble dealing with that. And I think kind of he when he felt the power a little bit, he kind of tried for some takedown. And Robbie Lawler is very tough to take down. That's one thing he's always had great in his career, is takedown defense. And I think Roy, for a guy that's kind of known for having the right strategy or the right game plan, did not have the right game plan that time around. So to me, the onus is on him in this fight. What will he do differently? What is he going to change to try to win in this rematch? Because Robbie Lawler has pretty much fought every fight in the UFC the same way. He's going to sprawl, he's going to brawl, and he's going to put a lot of output on you, and he's going to put a lot of power shots on you. And you either can deal with that or you can't. And most people so far have not been able to deal with that. He only lost once since coming back to the UFC, and that was obviously the first Johnny Hendricks fight. So for Roy MacDonald, I would say things he has to change. He has to have more movement. He has to be in and out quicker, and really look for scrambles to try to put Lawler in a bad position. And even if it's not the hardest shots, you got to keep output and you got to keep moving. I guess maybe to kind of look at a similar game plan, he's kind of got a Carlos Condon to Nick Diaz. He's got to keep moving and try to avoid those power shots and really try to frustrate Robbie Lawler. Get him frustrated that he can't get one of those big, powerful hooks on him. And that's kind of how, and he has to play for 25 minutes. I think he really does, because I'm not sure if he can knock Robbie Lawler out. At 170, I should say. And I think that's got to be his game plan. I think that's, at least for McDonald, I think that's his best chance to victory.
Yeah, I like that 100% about how you brought up the Condit Diaz fight, because I hated that strategy at the time. But to beat Lawler, you got to make him miss. You got to get him frustrated. You can't just – Johnny sort of got this thing of standing there and trading with him a little bit, and just make him miss, get him frustrated. He showed, like, he'll throw some wild shots. And McDonald, he's so smart with it. He can be able to find the open counters if he looks for them. And, he has to just keep moving. And I think – I don't want to spoil my pick a little, but I think this fight will be way different than they went the first time. And I really like McDonald. I think he's grown a lot, and I think he will find those openings. Lawler, I love the story. I love the comeback he made. I don't know how long he can keep it up. It'd be amazing if he does, but I think McDonald's going to look really good in this fight.
One thing I want to bring up, did you notice Roy McDonald has changed his nickname? I know it's a minor thing. It has no bearing on the fight or whatever. For most of his career, he was going by Ares, which is obviously the Roman god of war. Now changing it to the Red King, which I think is a nod to Red in Canada, him maybe being the king of Canada, so to speak. But I don't know, maybe it's a minor thing, but I think usually when a fighter changes their nickname, it changes the tone about their fight and how they're going about their business moving forward. And we'll see if the Red King ends up working here for him against Robbie Lawler.
Tell that to Diego Sanchez.
Yeah, that was definitely maybe a change of philosophy. Maybe the wrong way. I don't know.
Also, before we get into the main event, can we just talk about the GOAT fighting on this card, Cathal Pendrin?
Oh, my God.
I just want to say, the dude is about to get a title shot after this win over Howard, and look out for him.
Oh, man. Oh, Cathal. Oh, man. Man, and also speaking of, this may play into main event. Maybe it won't be. And we've heard Anthony Pettis say the loss by his brother on the 181 undercard kind of affected him in the main event mentally. And I wonder if Cathal or Gunnar Nelson loses, if that affects Conor at all. The way the guy builds himself up and the way he presents himself, my guess is no. But, I mean, let's say Cathal and Nelson get finished in the first round. That's kind of wearing you a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, you flew all the way from Ireland with these guys and you train with them so much. Maybe it won't once the cage doors close, but I got to feel that's got to affect you slightly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, imagine like a dude as good as McGregor watching a dude even better in Cathal lose. I mean, it's got to hurt the confidence. I don't know how you can deal with that. Cathal's a monster.
Right. And I guess on the same token, Cody Gambrandt is also fighting in the undercard from Team Alpha Male, one of Chad Mendes' teammates. So I guess that could kind of play both ways in this one. But I had to mention just because he has two teammates fighting on the same card.
Yeah, in that gym, they seem more than like just teammates. They seem like they're all pretty close and like they're coming over to make statements. So I got to imagine it weighs a little bit. But then again, like you said, the way Conor is, he's going to do his business.
Let's get to that main event for the interim UFC Featherweight Championship. Conor McGregor against Chad Mendes. McGregor 5-0. His last fight, a win over Dennis Seaver at Fight Night 59. 15 of his 17 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Mendes, 8-2 in the UFC. His last fight, a win over Ricardo Lamas at Fight Night 63. And 8 of his 17 career victories are by decision. Very simple. If it stays standing, Conor McGregor has a way better chance to win. Now, obviously, Mendes has improved leaps and bounds since the brief appearance there of Dwayne Bang Ludwig at Team Alpha Male. And I know he is, every once in a while, still trains with him out there in Colorado. But his stand-up is now very good, not to mention the tremendous power he has. But he's given up quite considerable height and reach disadvantage against Conor McGregor. And it will be interesting to see how Mendes deals with that, because he's never had to deal with someone that tall and that long so far in his UFC tenure. So that should be very interesting. And the other X factor is if Mendes can get this thing to the ground, how will Conor do off his back? We haven't really seen him on his back. Looking at his career, I don't believe he has a submission victory. Obviously, 17 wins, 15 knockouts, but I don't think one of those other two wins were by submission. I am double checking. In fact, he does have one submission victory, and that was back when he fought in Cage Warriors 3 years ago. That was a rear naked choke. So that's obviously not something he really goes for. So I don't really see Conor threatening with must submissions off his back against Chad Mendes. And obviously a conditioning thing. Conor hasn't had, in fact, has only had one decision victory and has not gone past, and that was his second fight in the UFC against Mac Holloway. That's the only fight that he has gone into the third round with. And obviously Chad Mendes has gone 15 minutes plenty of times, has been scheduled for 25 minutes a few times, has gone 5 rounds before. So in conditioning, just on paper, you have to give a slight edge to Mendes there. How will Conor deal if this goes past the 15-minute marker? These are all questions we're looking to be answered here in the main event. But it's hard to give who has a slight edge. But yeah, if Mendes gets this thing to the ground, I find it very hard to believe that Conor will do much to stop Chad Mendes. Now, he can stop the takedown, but I mean, in terms of stopping damage, getting back up, that's very tough to do. In fact, very few people have been able to do that against Chad Money Mendes. So if it stays standing, it's a lot more intriguing fight, and I actually have no doubt that Conor probably could knock out Chad Mendes if it stays on the feet for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I think McGregor's so good on his feet. I'm a little worried because this is the fight everyone wanted. I mean, everyone obviously wanted to see Aldo, but everyone's, he hasn't fought no wrestler. Oh, he had this. Well, we get to see it now, and honestly, we just don't know. I mean, he's so different from if you watch his way older fights. We'll see what he has to offer. I think if this fight does go the distance, Mendes will probably win. But do I think that'll happen? I think McGregor will be able to finish him on the feet. A little worried about the takedown, but I think McGregor will get the job done there. I mean, Mendes is so powerful in his striking, but when he throws them bombs, McGregor's going to land 3 or 4.
With that said, let's get to picks for UFC 189, starting first in the bantamweight division, Thomas Almeida against Brad Pickett. I think Almeida is definitely forced to be reckoned with. I think he's definitely an up-and-coming guy in this division, but I'm going to go with Brad Pickett. Moving back up, I think it's going to serve a lot better, and maybe it's not Almeida's time quite yet.
Yeah, I agree right there. I think Pickett will be able to control this fight on the ground and get the job done.
Gunnar Nelson against Brandon Thatch in the welterweight division. Very excited for this one. I think it's a very close fight. I think you can really go either way, but I'm going to go with Brandon Thatch in this one. I think his size will be hard for Gunnar Nelson to deal with, so I'm going to go with Brandon Thatch.
Yeah, I agree. I think Thatch is going to be too strong on the feet. I don't see Gunnar being able to get him down. I think Thatch honestly finishes him.
Featherweight division, Jeremy Stephens against Dennis Bermudez. Jeremy Stephens can most certainly win this fight. He definitely has knockout power and pretty good takedown defense, but I haven't really liked his last couple of performances, and despite Bermudez getting submitted early, I think Bermudez still looked better overall in his last couple of fights, so I'm going to go with the Menace to win this one.
Yep, I guess we're on the same page for all of these. I think Dennis Bermudez. I think this might be one of the last times we see Jeremy Stephens.
Welterweight title on the line, Robbie Lawler against Rory McDonald. I think Rory McDonald can do the strategy I outlined later, but just because he can do it doesn't mean he'll win with it. And I'm going to go with Robbie Lawler. I think he'll eventually land one of those powerful shots, albeit a punch or a kick, and I think he's going to finish Rory McDonald at some point in this fight. So I'm going to go with Robbie Lawler to defend his title.
I love Lawler, but I think Rory's he's operating differently right now. He's a lot better than he was. I think he'll find one of those openings, and I think he'll catch Robbie.
All right, Billy, is there any way you're not picking Conor McGregor?
I mean, if he gets injured and someone steps in, then maybe I could hopefully pick Cathal to step in and take this fight for him after he already beats Howard. But besides that, I mean, good luck.
All right, that is Big Shot Bill going with Conor McGregor there, and I really do want to pick Conor McGregor. I really want to do, but I'm gonna go Chad Mendes. I think maybe I might have picked Aldo, but yeah, I'm gonna go with Chad Mendes. I know people are gonna bring up short notice, but the guys at Alpha Male always seem to be ready to go, and even though he only fought 3 months ago, I mean, he knocked out Lamas in the first round. Chad Mendes is good to go, and I think he's been mentally preparing for a Conor fight for almost a year. So to me, I almost like throw that out the window that it's short notice, because he's been looking forward to fighting Conor for a very long time, really intrigued by his fight. So yeah, that's what I mean. He's always been safe. So I don't think that's really an excuse for him.
Yeah, I will say this also too. I felt way more confident picking McGregor over Aldo than Mendes somehow. I don't know what it is about Mendes' one-punch power and his wrestling, but it's a lot scarier of a fight, I think, for McGregor. But I still don't see it being a problem for him.
All right, before we end today's show, we got a slight programming note. Next week, we'll be doing 2 shows. We will have a show Monday afternoon, and that will be on July 13th. We will go live Monday afternoon. We will break down this fight here, 189. We'll also break down the Tough 21 finale, and we will pick the main card fights for the UFC Fight Night San Diego. Then, because Fight Night San Diego is on Wednesday, we will return that week of July 16th, Thursday afternoon, and we will go live breaking down Fight Night San Diego, previewing Bellator 140, and we also will pick the main card fights for UFC Glasgow, which will be next weekend on the UFC Fight Pass, July 18th. So that is our upcoming recording schedule for next week. So for Billy Brandt, I am Jim Graham. You can follow Billy on Twitter at WBrand21. You can follow me at Jim Graham. Thank you for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.